Hey, what's going on, DDO players? Axel here. Today we're going to talk about classes and playstyles and some traits and attributes of different classes you might want to consider when choosing a class. So this video might be a little more helpful for new players, but I'm also going to go through and just have a general discussion of what playstyles fit which classes. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about melees first. So melee is what I think is the most simple class, the easiest class to get into if you are a new player. To me, it's not that it's a easy class, because it's not. It's just the class with the more streamlined playstyle. They tend to not have as many options to worry about. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just means that most of your time is going to be spent up front swinging a sword. You don't have to worry about spell selection, SP management. Even though the game has gone more into a bring your own heals type of environment, you aren't as required or aren't as expected as other classes to bring your own buffs, to heal yourself, especially if we're talking about casual play. So say a group of players that's joining the game, or say role playing, where a group of players want to fill those traditional pen and paper roles, even though they may not per se be optimal in game. The class has that kind of expectation. But I think it's really good for players who don't want to micromanage a lot. So that's one of the traits that makes melees more... I don't want to use the word easier because, again, they're not an easy class, but it makes them a more streamlined class, a more straightforward class in a lot of ways. No SP management, no spell selection, nothing like that. They, for the most part, aren't going to be disabling traps, although you can build a melee class that way. But these classes in melee that I'm talking about are your traditional melee types, your fighters, your barbarians, those types of classes. So again, one of the other things that helps out in terms of making it easy to play, there's inventory management is fairly easy. Again, you don't have things like spell components to worry about, but in other ways, inventory management can actually be difficult because you have to bring more potions, more things to heal yourself. But that's stuff that's more along the lines of higher level play, and this video is more geared towards newer players. There's also fewer micromanagement in terms of hotbars, generally a lot less clutter on the screen, a lot less options to worry about. So while the class may not have as many options as, say, a spellcaster, that also means that play is easier and can be more effective in a lot of ways because you have less things to think about, less options, less basically attack types or buffs or spells, things like that to worry about. So it's easy in a lot of ways. I think one thing about melees that's nice is it's a good class to choose if you're a player who doesn't like to grind a whole lot. And by grinding, I mean grinding past lives, because I would say melees more than any other class benefit the least from past lives. Now, obviously, every class will benefit from past lives, but they aren't as essential as, say, past lives on a caster. If you really want to build a in-game or just a caster that can run, Reaper or run, harder content, you don't have to worry as much about past lives if you're going to run a melee, whereas on casters, you really do need some of these past lives if you want things like DCs to work on higher level content. So with that said, let's move on to the spellcasters, and in particular, let's talk about arcane spellcasters. So your wizards, your sorcerers, your warlocks. These are your classes I think are best generally for your players who want to put in a lot of time into the game, because again they have probably the most options of any class, a lot of spell selection. They benefit a lot from reincarnation. So in particular, your DC past lives, your spell penetration past lives really help you out if you're a spellcaster. In a lot of ways, they are basically required grinding if you really want to run and have effective success rates on your DC spells at higher level content. Again, these classes have more options generally. So if you're someone who wants, you have a whole spell book, especially when it comes to wizards, because they don't have as many spell slot restrictions as, say, a sorcerer. A lot of different ways you can take out enemies, a lot of different options, a lot of creative ways to take out your enemies. So say a melee, their options a lot of the time really are to hit them or not hit them. Now there's some CC options available, especially when you start talking about in-game past level 20 when you get your epic destinies involved. But spellcasters, more than melee classes, I would say, can choose a variety of ways to take out enemies. Do you want to build a sorcerer that is focused on CC? Do you want to spill crowd control for new players? Do you want to build a spellcaster that's focused on just straight burst damage? Do you want to build a spellcaster that likes to do status effects? Do you want to build a spellcaster that's more support? There's a lot of different types of spell schools you can choose from. So you can build a necro spellcaster, whatever you want. There's a lot of different options, a lot of different things. You can go with the sorcerer, specialize in elements. Say if your thing, see for me, my sorcerer is an ice savant because, well, I just enjoy that element. I just think it's cool to take people out, freeze people with ice spells. So I went with that. So there's a lot of different ways you can go in this direction without actually just building a melee that really is just going to hit stuff. The thing with spellcasters as well is I think this is the best class, if you're into it, for your really everyday players, your experienced players, your veteran players, because spellcasters throughout the history of the game, and I think that's true right now, tend to be the strongest classes in the game. Not always. Sure, there's periods of the game where that was an exception, but I think throughout the history of DDO, we've seen spellcasters kind of reign at the top more so than other classes. And I can see this from a balance perspective just because spellcasters just have more options. It's inherently more effective to take your enemies out from a distance than it is to take them out being right in front of their face. Why? Because it's harder for them to hit you. A lot of the enemies in this game are going to be melee. Now, a lot of casters as well, but generally the closer you are to an enemy, the more damage you're going to be taking, the easier it is for it to hit you. So if you're building a spellcaster that deals damage from a safe location, from at a distance, it's inherently going to be safer than a melee class, which is always going to have to be up in the enemy's face. So I think that's really the one trait that makes them the strongest classes in this game, in addition to just the variety of options and, of course, balance decisions that developers have made or have not made, I think, that have attributed to this. Spellcasters are probably the most effective when it comes... Arcane spellcasters probably one of the most effective when it comes to kiting, which, if you don't know what kiting is, it's an effective tactic in this game where you basically lay down some kind of spell that affects a small area, and you basically run in and out of it and drag enemies through it. Arcane spellcasters can probably do this more effectively. It's an effective tactic for soloing, especially. Now, divine spellcasters can do this well with a Bladeberry as well, but I think Arcanes are probably one of the best, if not the best, at this. So it's something that's nice. I think they're a very good soloing class. One of the drawbacks is micromanagement. As I've mentioned, micromanagement is very high with this class, which is another reason why I think it's for it lends itself to be for more your expert players, your seasoned veteran players. A lot of hotbars, a lot of different options. You need to learn more than you do with melee classes. You've got to know what is the right spell in what circumstance. Now, melees have some things they have to know. They have to know, say, what weapon to use to break this DR, what damage type is effective on this monster, etc. But spellcasters a lot of the time need to know specific traits of enemies. So, is this an undead enemy? Should I be using light spells? Is this a troll that's vulnerable to fire? Things like that. There's a lot of little things like that that really help you in being a spellcaster. Things that you have to know when you have so many options. You have to know which option is going to be the most effective in which circumstance. Let's move on. As I might have mentioned, this class is probably, since it's the best for the veteran player, I think it is the least friendly for the new player. Not to say that a new player shouldn't go for this. If you're a new player, I always encourage you, as I always say in these videos, is that the most optimal class for you is the class that gives you the most fun. It gives you the best experience, because every class in this game is viable. So pick the one that's best for you. But I do think that this class is going to be the most difficult, just because combat is more complex. Not to say, again, that new players can't do it. It's just you got to learn a little bit more. Some of the past lives that you really should run if you want to get really into running a spellcaster is you're really going to want the spell pen and the DC past lives, as I mentioned before. it really does make a difference in a lot of content. Now, if you're a casual player and you want to run more just stuff on normal, you don't need to do this at all. And even through heroics on elite, my arcane that I ran is a wizard. I just run an enchantment wizard. It's not optimal, but I just do it because it's fun and I like enchanting stuff. I ran him through. I remember when I ran him through First Life, ran mostly all elite, and I had not too many issues getting my DCs to work. So in heroics, it's not as big of an issue, but in stuff like especially when you get to epics, you're going to need those past lives. It really helps. Let's now talk about hybrid classes. So these are your druids, your bards, your artificers, your rogues, classes that don't really fit in either arcane or divine or melee. They do a little bit of both. These classes offer some of the most options, whereas spellcasters offer a ton of options. Those tons of options. Those options that spellcasters offer are all spells, right? Because they're just spellcasters. They're all spell-focused abilities, whereas hybrid classes can offer a lot of different things. Say you build a rogue, he can melee. He might be able to use a crossbow. He might be able to. Well, he definitely should be able to do picks and locks. He has a high skill, high item skill, so he can use scrolls well. As his UMD skill, I meant to say there. So his UMD skill is inherently good, so he can use a lot of different scrolls. There's a lot of versatility there. It's easier for him to self-heal in heroics, things like that. So there's a lot of little things you can do if you want to do a little bit of spellcasting, say a little bit of melee, and you want to do a little bit of support. If you like a lot of different roles, these are probably the best classes for you. So you could argue that this class offers the most overall amount of options. I think because of that, this class is really good for players who get bored. So you get, like, I have this problem. This is why I enjoy classes like this that do a lot of different things. And I always enjoy these types of classes more than, say, just a straight melee or a straight spellcaster, because, you know, one day I might want to play in a little bit different way than another day. So I run even though a cleric doesn't, and I'll talk about divines in a second, even though a cleric doesn't really fit into this category, what I like about the build I run, which is a kind of not a traditional cleric either, a cleric / melee kind of hybrid class. What I like about that is I can do a lot of different things. If I need to sit back and just heal, I can do that. If I want to just do straight out DPS, I can do that. If I need to kite, I can do that. If I want to tank, I can switch up my gear set, my Epic Destiny, and do that. And hybrids offer this kind of options as well. Druids and bards in particular have a lot of different options, a lot of different ways to play. Definitely more ways to play than just your melee or just your spellcaster, which is really going to specialize in one thing for the most part. Not to say that spellcasters can't be tanks, because certainly they can a little bit, or they can't do other things. They certainly can do other things. Just hybrids, I think, have more flexibility while not being as good at any one particular thing. I also find that this is a good option if you enjoy support, but you don't want all the pressure that being a healer comes with. So if you like doing, say you want to run a rogue, you get to do a little bit of support because you can do traps. And that's nice. People will want you in their groups. It helps with getting groups. It helps with meeting people, because there's a lot of situations where, hey, we want a trapper. So if you have a build that specializes, that can unlock every trap in the game, it's going to be attractive to groups, attractive to people. They're going to want to meet you. They're going to want to invite you to their groups. So it's good in that way, but it doesn't come with the pressure of, oh my God, if I don't heal these people right, they might die and they might get mad at me. If you have a high enough DC to unlock the traps, you know that you can do it. So you just go and you find the trap and you do it. You don't have to worry about actually executing it. Now you might have to make sure you don't get killed by the trap while you're unlocking it, but generally that's not as much of a problem as if you're a healer and you're trying to react to what other people are doing, because the trap box, you know where it is. It's going to be there. You're good. All right, now let's move on to divine. So this is your clerics, your favorite souls. This is the types of classes I like to run the most. Although again, I don't run a traditional straight divine. I run like a melee cleric. So I'm a little bit of a melee, a little bit of a divine, a little bit of a hybrid class, I guess you could say. But this is referring more to your straight divine, so your cleric casters, your favorite soul casters. And you have to be a little heartless or have a lot of, or actually, the way I should state that is you need to have a lot of heart to play this class, because even in today's game, where we've gone away from these traditional roles where divines aren't expected to heal all the time, even though we're in that type of environment now, there's still an expectation that you heal, at least that you spot heal all the time. Because the fact is, when you run a divine, you make a decision. You decide to sacrifice your melee and your casting DPS in exchange for buffing abilities and healing abilities. So if you're not contributing those healing and buffing abilities to the group, why are you running a divine? I'm not saying that divines have to heal all the time or have to buff all the time, but if you're not in some capacity offering those abilities to your group, why are you running a divine? If you're not doing that, then you're just running a gimped spellcaster or a gimped melee, because pure melee classes are going to be better at melee. Pure spellcaster, arcane spellcasters are going to, for the most part, do more DPS and contribute more in that department. So you really should offer what your class. You should generally be willing to share what your class offers, the specialty that your class offers. So healing is the main advantage here. You have to be really willing to want to play that support role, and that does come with a lot of pressure. Again, not as much today because there's a lot of bring your own heals today, but still there's a lot of scenarios, especially in heroics before classes get their epic destiny abilities and in raiding environments, where you are expected to play the role of the healer. So you got to be willing to accept that pressure, because sometimes people can die, and people's experiences in raids or in content can suffer if you make mistakes, and that's a weight you're gonna have to take on your shoulders if you play this class. But on the other hand, it's also a role that's very much wanted in a lot of groups. It's probably the rarest class in the game, and because of that, you're wanted a lot in groups, because people always like healers. It's the best class for meeting people, I would say, for sure, because you're going to be accepted in pretty much every group because people want a healer. Now, there's some exceptions to that, say, because divines haven't been the best classes historically in terms of strength, so some really min-maxer groups might not want you, but for the most part, for most people, divines going to be very welcome in groups. Another good thing about divines is it's not all that gearing intensive. If you play it as a healer first and then DPS second, a lot of your healing, your main function in a group, your healing aspect, a lot of that's inherent. You don't have to gear a lot to be a healer. Because why? Because it's not DPS. You are healing your party members, and they don't have hundreds of thousands or millions of HP to heal, unlike the enemies in this game. Everyone in the game has 1,000 or 2 at most. So because of that, you don't have to worry about getting your positive spell power up to this ridiculous amount, because after you get it up to a certain amount, you're just overhealing after that, and getting it up to the amount where you're healing just enough but not overhealing is not that particularly difficult. You don't have to grind raids per se, or grind these hard quests to get an extra 20 positive spell power that the best gear in the game might be offering at the moment. Your inherent spell abilities are enough. So I would say it's probably the least gearing intensive of all the classes. It's also good with inventory management, probably the best group of classes in the game with inventory management, because you inherently have most of your spells that can heal pretty much, not every status effect, but most of the status effects in the game you can heal inherently without having to, say, have a million potions or have certain clickies to heal them. So that's nice. Now, clerics are better at this than favorite souls, because favorite souls are a lot more limited in terms of spell space. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I would say that divines have middle of the road micromanagement, definitely harder than a melee, but not as difficult as an arcane. You tend to have divines more than arcanes have some really good spells, but they tend to have a lot of bad spells that aren't really useful either, whereas arcanes have a lot more, just in terms of raw numbers, useful spells. Divine spells tend to be either really good or really bad and not useful. So, and you have a lot of key spells, like, say, the heal spell, which is a really important spell, or stuff like Death Ward that's really, really good. But you have a lot of garbage spells like, say, Panica, things like that you really aren't going to use much, if at all. So that's gonna be it for all those classes. So in summary, I would say that the main thing to remember is that you want to play in this game. You want to play the class that best suits you in terms of what's going to be the most fun. Because one thing I always want to emphasize is that this game has a lot. Every class is viable in this game. Every single quest or raid that you run has different difficulty settings. So it's too hard, you can tone it down, and you aren't overly penalized for that at all in this game. So the most optimal class for you is always going to be the one where you have the most fun. But if you are torn between a lot of classes, or if two groups of classes seem equally fun to you, this is where the things I've laid out in this video hopefully will help you a little bit, and I hope they have. So that's going to be it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Take care.